Well, I've been asked to relate to you a story, a ballooning story that happened many years ago. We used to go up in the Derbyshire Hills ballooning. A friend of mine called Adrian Wood had this balloon, and I used to retrieve with a guy called Steve. He used to drive a truck up there, following this balloon all over the hills and pick it up in the most remote places and bring it back. And then Adrian said, "Why don't you learn to fly?" So I said, "Yeah, come on, let's try it. I'd love to be a pilot of a balloon." So I've been up with him a few times, and he's shown me how to level it out, how to burn, how to do this, that and the other, how to land. And then he said, "Well, you've got to learn how to inflate it." So one evening we're up at a place called Winkle, which is just at the back of Macclesfield, up in the hills, in a valley. But you have to inflate balloons in valleys or behind trees, out of the way of the wind. And it was by a little river where there were plenty of fishermen fishing, and very nice spot indeed. So I was in this balloon. The balloon was flat out on the ground with two guys on a line at the head of it, and the basket on its side, and me in the basket with the burner, and two people holding the mouth open while I was putting a flame into it. And I kept on burning and burning, and Adrian's kept on saying, it's getting very big and it should have come up by now, it should have come up by now, keep on burning. And it got bigger and bigger. And then he went round to the far end to these two guys on the rope, and there were half a dozen fishermen who saw these two guys hanging on to it and thought they'd help. So he told them to let the rope go. What happens is the balloon suddenly comes upright and takes off, and with me falling into the back of the basket. And I distinctly remember this sort of first thoughts that you have. I remember seeing the farmhouse go past next to us and seeing a reflection in the bedroom window, in the mirror of the wardrobe, actually seeing me and the basket go past that. So I think that then there were all sorts of instructions being shouted out from below. Some people saying burn, burn, other people saying rip, rip, which means pull a rope which opens a hole in the top of the balloon, it will come down again. And then I heard a yelling from very close underneath me, and I looked over the side of the basket, and there was a young guy with a leather jacket on with studs all over it, looking frightened to death, hanging on and yelling his head off. And it was an odd view to see him with the background of all these vehicles down below and people waving, and him just underneath dangling there. So I scrambled over the side of the basket and got my hands round his shoulders, and together he came scrambling up the side and we both fell in the bottom of the basket again. Then I got up and started to burn, because we were going down like a brick, and we started to go up again. I looked over, I could just see chimney pots and roof tops and people waving and all sort of a calamity down below. And I thought, well, the best thing I can do is just get the hell out of here and keep on burning, and I did. And then we seemed to be stable, and there was a thing called a variometer, which was supposed to tell us how high we were, and that was stable. I thought, well, we're all right. And then I switched it on, it was switched off, and we were going again down like a lead balloon. So I burnt again. And this young guy looked absolutely mesmerised to be up there, and he looked at me and he said, "You know," he said, "I've never been up in a balloon before." And I said, "Well, I've got to admit," he said, I said, "I haven't either. This is my first time. I'm just learning to fly." So he then was still mesmerised by all the cows and the fields and what it looked like to be up. And then I said, "Look, we've got to get this thing down. Never mind about the bloody cows in the fields. We've never done this before." And by this time there was a convoy of vehicles, Land Rovers and cars and everything, all with the headlights on, blowing the horns, all following me along the little country lanes. And I said to this guy, we've got to get this balloon down, because genuinely I haven't flown it before. I said, "What I want you to do," I said, "we're going to get it low in a field, and before we hit the ground, I want you to turn that gas bottle off," because we only got one cylinder in at that time. I said, "and I'll pull the rip." I said, "and then hang on." I said, "Hang on to those handles and keep well within the basket until we've stopped dragging along the ground." "Right," he said. So we find this field, and it manages. I mean, it's very difficult in the balloon because it doesn't do as you want it to do. You go with the wind, so you can see a field, and by the time you get to it, it's over there. Anyway, we found a field that was dead ahead of us. So we started to come down slowly. I gave it little burns. We came down and down and down. And then with a balloon, when you're up there, you feel as if you're hardly moving. But when you get close to the ground, the trees and everything seem to be travelling past at 50 miles an hour. And all of a sudden a big cart horse, a big shire horse, came galloping across with big hooves like buckets, with hairy hooves. And I don't know why, I should have carried on landing, but I started to burn and we went up like a 747. And this guy said, I thought we were supposed to be landing. I said, I know, but I just didn't think and I burnt. I said, we'll try the next field. So we tried about 2 or 3 fields, and each time it all went wrong, we went up again. We were like a yo-yo going along the landscape with this big convoy following us. And he then said, well, why don't we land in that woods? Just land in the trees and we can clamber down the branches and get off the thing. I said, no, I said, we're going to land it. Then I noticed ahead of us was the town of Leek in Staffordshire, and it seemed to stretch for miles with its housing estates, factories, church steeples and everything. And we only had one cylinder, because when you're taking off with a balloon, once you've become upright and it's stabilised, you put all the other cylinders in. But we only had one, and I realised that we didn't have enough gas to get across it. So I said, look, I said, we've got to get this, whatever happened, before we get to that town, we've got to get this balloon down, whatever happens. Right, he said. I said, now I told you what to do, turn that gas tap off, that knob off, I said, because we want no gas. Right, he said. So we then lined it up, we saw a field, it was a long field, and we were dead right for it. We started to come down, down and down. I was giving little burns, little blips, and we came right down, and then everything started to rush towards us. We were both ready. Then all of a sudden I noticed across the middle of the field was a lane with trees, and the worst thing was there were telegraph poles with big, what looked like thick power lines going across. Now I'd only read a few days before about an American balloon with carol singers in during Christmas, floating over this little town, and they hit some power lines and the whole lot went up in a load of flames, all burnt to death. So I thought, my God. So I said to him, look, I've got to, so I burnt. So we tried to get over this thing, but it didn't, because it takes 10 seconds for a balloon to react to that burn, and in that 10 seconds we didn't go up. We were still going towards these power lines. So I said, right, we're about double-decker bus height at this time. I said, right, I said, we're both going to jump. I said, turn that knob off, I'll pull the ripcord, and we'll both jump, which we both did. And we both jumped out, rolled over under this hedge. And then next to us was a telegraph pole, and this thing came out of the ground like a carrot, and started going round and round with wires twanging as the balloon got mixed up with them and went up with all these wires. And then the balloon, the envelope collapsed and it came down with a big bang and a cloud of flame as the, I don't know why there was a flame, but there was a flame, all the cows running all over the place and chaos. And then the convoy comes up with all the horns blowing and lights flashing, people running towards us saying, are you all right? And I said, yes, we're perfectly all right. And they said, well, we switched off all the power had gone off for miles around, or it may have been the telephones, but there were certainly big thick looking cables. And that was that story, which I believe is quite well known in the annals of ballooning.